It's that time again, that time when we step into the virtual bar for some refreshment and see what conversations are lurking out there for us to sit amongst the other patrons. Today, we strike up a conversation about the separation of church and state, and if it's even a thing. We are your hosts, Chris, Ken, and Greg, and this is Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. Did you like that?
I did.
That's the pirate mix. Three pastors walk into a bar.
Bar, matey.
Bar, matey. Wow.
Okay, we digress. Man, right to get-go. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you set the bar low, it's easy to climb over the top of it.
To go is up.
Especially when you start getting older. You want to set the bar really old.
What are you...
Or really low.
You intimating here that
what are you saying?
Old?
That you're older than dirt. Yeah, that's what I'm intimating.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. First time I heard that, I fell off my dinosaur laughing.
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly. Elections that are coming up. We did our voter guide last week and had someone message us and tell us that we made Ammon Bundy look like a criminal.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. Which I thought was odd because that's exactly the opposite of what we said. It's strange to me how people can listen to these things and have perhaps a preconceived notion about what they're going to hear, and then make that into the truth in spite of what you say. Mm-hmm. Isn't that odd?
Yes.
I think it's an odd piece of psychology, I think.
That's the gal that lambasted us for, what were they? We were left wing. We're putting everybody down that we could think of, and
what's that?
When we looked at her screenshot of Three Pastors,
yeah, she had like watched 20 minutes of it
at the most. Didn't even get through.
That was the one on Christian nationalism, with Paul Vinoy.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So she
roasted us.
I would encourage you, if you're listening to this right now, listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then listen to what we say.
Yeah.
Because you might be surprised.
We always start off at the bottom.
We set the bar really low so we can climb over the bar.
We are accelerating already.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Yeah, it's pretty good. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 through 4, it says this: share in suffering as a good soldier of Jesus Christ, or Christ Jesus, sorry. No soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. What version is that?
That's probably ESV.
ESV? I cannot read Bible verses in any other version except for King James.
Yeah.
It's like when I read it, I'm like, what verse is this?
Chris, it's because you're old.
It's probably true. I'm not old.
He grew up while the KJV was brand new.
Yeah, I'm not old. Stupid people.
The King's English. Now, if that doesn't sound old.
I like the way he slurped his coffee there, though. That was good.
Thick?
Like on the microphone?
Yeah, a little. Yeah.
Good.
Could I do that?
That's good day old coffee.
Ugh.
Because the coffee is in the pot from yesterday at church.
Oh, well, I love
just heated
coffee.
Up. Yeah. I mean, it does its job.
Yep.
That's all that matters. So, as a Christian, if you mention the church in any conversation about politics with a secular person, one of the very likely things that they're going to raise up as an objection is the so-called separation of church and state. They'll adamantly insist that the church shouldn't be involved in politics. And their objection is based on the false notion that the Constitution forbids churches to participate in the political process, and something that they call the separation of church and state. It's shocking to me, even the number of believers that think that this is what the Constitution says. Mm-hmm. In fact, we've had people that have left our church because we mentioned politics from the pulpit or political ideals from the pulpit. Yes. I honestly have no idea how you can separate political ideals from moral compunction.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that's possible.
Since Constitution was based on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, politics rolls down, is downstream from morality. So, your politics are going to be built around whatever your moral basis is.
Can't have one without the other.
No, it's impossible. It's like, how do you ask a person to, all right, look, we're going to ask you to go, I know you're a believer, and I know you believe these things to be morally true, and I know that you believe that the Bible is morally true and absolute, so we're going to ask you to go to Washington, D.C., and pretend you're an atheist. Like, how's that possible?
It's not.
Like, why would you even think that that's a thing? That's such a ridiculous notion. But that seems to be what people want. They want these Christian conservatives to go be in positions of power and then not use their conscience to make decisions.
Yes. Or the Bible. Which is where their conscience is
represent them, which is why they're voted in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. And there's such a growing number of Christians that believe this to be true. So we thought that probably the best thing that we can do is to address the issue. Like, let's talk about the separation of church and state and what it is, right? Because one of the things that people often say is, it's like, well, the church shouldn't be involved with politics. We should be concerned about spreading the gospel, right? I've had this conversation with people before. They're like, we should not be concerned about anything else but spreading the gospel. It's like, well, okay, try that in a society where you don't have freedom of speech.
Your head will be lopped off.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Try to live a life of spreading the gospel without the freedoms that you have right now. Imagine what the world would look like if America was not a free nation to freely exercise religion. How many nations would be how many people would be suffering now because of all the good that Christians do?
And they are. I mean, there's many countries around the world right now that expressing your faith in something other than what the state has made known is a crime, punishable oftentimes by death.
Yeah.
Right.
It allows the state to just suppress all moral religious thought completely. It'll just kill it.
So in what section, Greg, of the Constitution is the term separation of church and state?
The term?
Yeah.
You mean like the First Amendment? That one?
Well, I mean,
or are you talking about the actual wording, separation of church and state?
Yeah, the wording, separation of church and state.
It's not there.
You're correct. Yeah. The term separation of church and state does not exist in the Constitution.
In the Constitution, yeah.
At all.
It was, who was it?
It's Thomas Jefferson. Well, the Danbury Baptist letter.
Right.
And then there's another letter as well. We're going to go through those here in just a second. But I think it's important to state that right off the bat. You know, for people that are ardent defenders of the separation of church and state.
It's not there.
It's not a thing. Period. It's just not there. You're basing your argument off of something that doesn't exist.
Not in the legal sense.
Not in the legal sense, for sure.
Opinion sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly have the opinion that the church should not be involved in politics, but there's certainly no constitutional mandate.
It says that actually the opposite.
In a way, yeah, it is.
You know, it's saying the government
yeah.
shall make no laws concerning religion.
Right, right. And there is a double-edged sword to this, right? So maybe we should get into that. Maybe that'll come up through the conversation, because there is a double-edged sword to that when you start talking about the idea of theocracy and Christian nationalism and things like that. But let's see what the free exercise clause of the First Amendment actually says. The Establishment Clause to the First Amendment says this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances, which is what happened on January 6th. I'm just kidding.
Well, rails now.
I mean, they were redressing their grievances, but yeah, they certainly didn't do it peacefully.
Yeah, the peaceable part.
Yeah, the peaceable part kind of.
Yeah, Seattle.
It kind of messed up a little bit. Yeah,
demonstrations in Seattle. They were
yes,
peaceable.
Yes,
you know.
Mostly.
And everybody got arrested that, broke windows and destroyed things.
You know they did not. In fact, a lot of them got arrested and then bailed out by politicians.
Yep. Amen to that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of nastiness that goes on there. You could get into that for sure. That's a good conversation to have as well. But that's the establishment clause of the First Amendment. That declaration is our guarantee of religious freedom and was made in reaction to religious intolerance that they were facing in Britain at the time, because of the Church of England, which I don't want to be too hard on the Church of England, but they have a long history of being tyrannical.
Yes.
True.
Over the past few centuries, they've been it's been a dumpster fire over there, politically speaking, with the Church of England. And a lot of people, probably that's one of the reasons why they dislike the King James so much, the King James Bible, is because it was petitioned by the King of England. And if you read through it, it's interesting, because if you read through it, I'd have to pick out all the instances. I had looked at this before, and I've forgotten since then, but there are pieces of the King James that are translated in such a way to bring a positive light to the king, to the secular king.
Right.
Not
They're
the
kind
King
of
of
odd when
Kings.
you run into them when you're reading it.
They're off-putting.
You're like,
and,
what?
And what's interesting is that you can't exegete them from the Greek. Like you can't pull them out from the Greek. They had to have been placed there intentionally. I think one of them is in Revelation somewhere. And then there's another one. There's 3 or 4 instances of that in the New Testament that I can think of.
Interesting.
But it is interesting. But being aware of it helps, you know, because it's like, okay, I know I have the Word of God because I can exegete it from the Greek in all these places, but then I can pick out where were like, okay, well let's say that the king is really great here. It's like like sprinkle it a little bit.
We can get some positivity here.
Yeah.
Well, the one I like is that most people that really are adamant about the King James, they know that that's the Bible that Jesus used.
Well, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean
the words are read.
but only the 1611. It's got to be the King James 1611
version.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, hopefully you'll don't take that to heart. All right, do your research.
Yeah. Which Bible did Jesus use? Tell me.
He was kind of like the author,
What, oh yeah, it's kind of like his biography.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I got you.
Very similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who did his biography?
Paul.
Was it Paul?
Paul wrote everything. Don't you know that? Haven't you learned anything in Hebrews? Apparently, I'm aggravating people
Is that a book
with my
of the
statement
Bible?
that Paul wrote Hebrews.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Well, even Ken here.
Well, Ken thinks it was Apollos. We've had this conversation.
Yeah, it was great.
That's one of his theories.
Yeah. I was leaning towards Nicodemus.
My middle name is Paul, so it has to be Paul. Yeah, that's my logic.
That's the anointed name.
That's my logic behind
Makes
my
sense.
argument. It's like, Pastor Chris, how do you justify that Paul was the writer of Hebrews? Well, because my middle name is Paul. That's why.
Do people accept that?
It's 50-50.
How much, huh?
50-50. Most people, I mean, a lot of Christians will just believe whatever you tell them. That's a sad statement.
That is a sad statement.
Yeah. Let's let that soak in for a minute.
Yeah. A whole minute or maybe just like
That's
5
just, I think we'd be done with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So where does the phrase separation of church and state come from? It was originally used by Thomas Jefferson in an 1802 letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. And this is what he wrote, quote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." The whole context here is that the state cannot create a law
That's right.
that establishes or prohibits religion.
Or
And
the exercise of it.
or the exercise thereof. And he goes on to say, adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. I think that's an important statement. That man, all his natural rights, convinced that he has no natural right in opposition of his social duties. Kind of giving you the idea that his natural right of religion is not in opposition to his social duties. And what are your social duties? Your social duties are to vote. Your social duties are to serve on juries. Your social duties are to live up to the laws of the land.
Laws, right?
You know, these are your social duties. And how do you do those without your natural rights being intact? And one of your natural rights is the natural right to the exercise of religion and the use of your religion to make your moral decisions. Keywords there being establishment and free exercise. They present two contexts that leave a lot of room for interpretation. And here are some of the interpretations, and we're going to get into these interpretations, and we got a lot of like court cases where we can kind of discuss what happens in between those things. A simple reading of the amendment means that it prohibits the government from either promoting or infringing upon any religion. It does not prohibit the acknowledgement of the existence of God by the government, nor does it prevent cooperation between two institutions towards shared goals for American society, which are essential, according to John Adams, who once said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other."
That statement really sits with me deeply, because we are no longer a moral nation. We are no longer a religious nation. And therefore, the Constitution, I don't want to say it's nullified, but it certainly is.
It's under attack.
Yeah, it's under attack
Because of that.
by those that believe that separation of church and state is exactly that.
Well, it is weakened
Totally.
when you have no moral balance.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that our form of government relies upon is the balance, checks and balances, balance of power, balance of ideals, balance of political, of political goals and agendas. It's one of the reasons why you see this kind of like flip-flopping of Republican versus Democrat. The reason that works so well is because when you get to one end of the spectrum and it gets too heavily weighed on one end of the spectrum, the people naturally vote to bring it back into balance. You're going to see that, I think, this Tuesday. You're going to see people come out and vote for a Republican takeover of at least the House.
Yeah.
The Senate will be extremely close. Like it's debatable as to how close the Senate races are going to be. But that balance is really important. And now you have in morality, beyond governance, when you're talking about morality, you have an imbalance of morality at this point where we are very heavily leaning into secular humanism, into moral relativism, into postmodernism. We have a lot of these kind of ideals that are being taught at the school level. And these philosophies follow through into the college, and then these people become professionals, and then you have this imbalance of postmodernism versus Christian morality. And when you lose that balance, that's when you begin to lose sight of what the Constitution really was, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and then you have, I believe, the socialism side of that every country that has leaned towards that socialism, that's where they start. They go to the schools and they start indoctrination at a very, very young age.
Yep.
So by the time they're able to have discussions and able to vote, they have already taken on that particular reality for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's scary because we in America right now are in the same boat.
Worldview.
It's happened.
Which harkens back to our episode about the American Worldview Survey we just talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
And that survey just obviously points it out that it has swung far away from our origins.
Yeah.
So Satan and his minions are doing a wonderful job.
The idea of balance is really important, I think. I have a friend of mine that talks about balance a lot. And it really kind of makes sense if you think about it, you know, the importance of balance. Like socialism, for instance. You know, I often wonder, when will pure socialists, like people who are like ardent supporters of total socialism, when will they learn that it doesn't work? You know what I mean? It's like, how many examples do you need that socialism doesn't work? And they'll point to like, well, look how successful China is. Well, China is successful because they've set up capitalist zones.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, what does it take to show you? You know, it's like,
it's not pure anymore, folks.
Yeah, no. Yeah. What about all those Nordic countries that have socialist systems? No, they're capitalist with socialist programs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a balance there that's been struck. Yeah. You know, and I'm not saying that there's not room for like socialist programs, but what I'm saying is
we have our fair share here.
There's a balance that has to be struck. Mm-hmm. You know, and when you're dealing with the world, you can't. When you're dealing with politics and with governance and that type of thing, there's a balance that has to be struck. Mm-hmm. And when you disrupt that balance, that's when you decline. Either way. Mm-hmm. Like we've seen it decline the other way too, when there's an imbalance of morality on the other side and you get things like theocracy. Like people who support the idea of a theocracy, same thing. Like how many times do you need to see demonstrated that it fails? Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. And because there's no balance. It's like you're expecting people to live godly that have no God.
And the rhetoric there is always that, well, they didn't do it right. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been done right. So back to your initial question.
We're going to do it right this time.
Yeah, we're going to do it right.
This time we're going to do it right. Yeah.
How many failures does it take?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? So in 1808, there was a letter to the Virginia Baptists that Jefferson wrote where he used the same thing. He says, "We have solved by fair experiment the great and interesting question whether freedom of religion is compatible with order in government and obedience to the laws. And we have experienced the quiet as well as the comfort which results from leaving everyone to profess freely and openly those principles of religion which are on the inductions of his own reason and the serious convictions of his own inquiries." I love this language. I could read these letters all day long. Have you ever read the Federalist Papers?
Yeah, haven't yet. We've got them on tape right now.
Oh man, I could read that book all day long. The language that they used is just
the conviction.
Yes. And the
strong.
wording is like no word is wasted.
Right.
You know, it's just beautiful. It's like reading Spurgeon. Mm-hmm. You know, most people won't read Spurgeon today because he's just too complex, but it's like an exercise of like understanding language and the importance of it. It makes you want to improve your vocabulary.
Absolutely.
Yes. It inspires you to improve your vocabulary. But I think it's interesting that you can see in these letters that in the original like founders of our country, they were concerned about this idea of the free exercise of religion. Because they came out of deep persecution in Britain because of that. The Pilgrims, they left and came over here and settled because of religious persecution in a place where religion was part of the government. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how they were concerned about that. And so it brings us to the Supreme Court in a case, Zorich versus Clausen in 1952, which held that the nation's institutions presuppose a supreme being and that the government's recognition of God does not constitute the establishment of a state church.
Yeah, it's a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, freedom. There's the freedom right there. The freedom of the government to believe what it wants to believe.
Yeah, but the government can't believe something.
No, it's an entity.
It's an entity of a whole.
Yeah.
So it can't believe anything, but it can acknowledge that there's a supreme being. That doesn't violate anybody because that's true in all religions. So in reality, the way I look at that, I see that as a positive and a negative. People are like, in God we trust is on our money, and that's a really great thing. Well, it depends on who you are. If your God is the God of the universe, then yeah, that's a great thing. The God that we serve, God the Father, and God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But a Muslim's going to read that completely differently, and a Buddhist is going to read that completely different, and a Hindu is going to read that completely differently, and a Satanist is going to read that completely differently.
Thus, the disruption we have in our government today, regarding religion,
is why it's a really great argument as to whether it belongs there or not. Because, and this is kind of like the thing with like in God we trust on our money, and in God we trust in our pledge, and prayer in school, and prayer at council meetings, and things of that nature. It's like we have Christians that really push for these ideals because, hey, we free exercise of religion, free exercise of religion, free exercise of religion. And then we get all those things going, and then the first time a Muslim shows up and wants to pray, we want to freak out about it. Mm-hmm. It's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say we want to have prayer in our committee meetings and then exclude Muslims or Satanists or whatever. That's not the way our Constitution works. And so that's kind of what I was talking about. It's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
You have to be very careful with it because it can turn around and bite you.
Yeah. The supreme being is what is at question here.
Yeah. And who that is.
Who is your supreme being?
Yeah.
Back in 1952, there was only one option in this country. There may have been more.
One accepted option.
They weren't vocal about it, but now they are.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that it took until 1952 for this to happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's very indicative of our country's history and the direction it was going, that it began to be taken up all the way to the Supreme Court to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's, as we'll see, it's just been a parade of other cases.
Do you think that's because for like the previous like 200 years that we kind of left it alone? Or do you think that it was just because it was predominantly Christian and it wasn't a question?
Yeah, it wasn't a question. Yeah. That's definitely what I believe. But the 50s, we saw a lot of freedoms, personal freedoms start to blossom, if you will, after the war, and life was good. And I think a lot of people at that point started money and prosperity started to be their God.
Yeah.
And, even though the church was full, it wasn't full of believers.
Yeah.
I think there were exceptions before that, but they just hadn't reached critical mass to where they could have a true voice.
Yeah. If you look at the 30s, 40s, and 50s, there was a lot of like philosophy that rose up during that era. Enlightenment type era.
And debauchery.
Yeah. And, and a lot of that stems from these philosophies, like when you believe in like postmodernism or, moral relativism or, different things like that. It leads to a questioning of God.
Which coincided with a huge migration from Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so I think it was the perfect storm that was bound to happen. I think maybe Christians, maybe Christians dealt with it poorly.
But as you had mentioned earlier, the Federalist Papers, that was written to explain the Constitution, basically. But today, it's necessary for people to read those to understand more clearly what our founding fathers were trying to do with the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so they are as important as the Constitution.
Yeah.
If you don't understand our Constitution,
I can tell you this, that they were not trying to make a secular atheist state, nor were they trying to make a Christian theocracy.
No,
neither of those things is true. And when you hear people say that, our nation is a Christian nation, it was founded by Christian founders, it's like, well, yeah, kind of. Kind of. Yeah, a lot of them were Christians. A lot of them believed in God. A lot of them, some of them were deists. Some of them were of faiths that you would not count as being like Christian faiths. And so you have to be really careful with this language. It's like the intention was not to create a base for the launching of Christian philosophy in politics.
No.
It was there created so that everyone of every belief would feel comfortable participating in such a thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were really smart. I mean, they
Yeah.
they saw
Yes.
an opportunity to make the mistake of creating what they had run from
Mm-hmm.
and build in safeguards against that, against their own proclivities almost.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, going back to Adams, you know, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So as our government starts to degrade and starts to go towards secular humanism, the Constitution isn't going to work.
Yeah, it will begin to fall because
Yes.
when you share the type of freedoms that we have without morality,
Mm-hmm.
you devolve into anarchy.
Yeah.
That's the natural progression. And then once you fall into anarchy, then you fall into despotism.
And they knew that.
Yeah, and they knew that. And so yeah, that they leaned on the freedom of religion to be able to help keep society in check.
Right.
Like people don't realize the importance of the church in the United States of America. I don't care what church it is, as long as the church is teaching like morality from a purely kind of political kind of point of view. You know, if the church is teaching some type of morality and governance and respect for law, then that's what the church is there to accomplish. You know, it keeps the people into a moral kind of track that helps guide the country, you know, and helps them be able to enjoy the freedoms that they have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have the freedom of speech, but you have no morality to garner that, to guard that speech, then yeah, you get hate speech and you get, you know, the things that people hate right now. And instead of like trying to teach people morality so that they don't speak that way,
Silence.
what happens is the secular world that has no God, they try to create laws to force their morality upon those that would say that, you know, I hate this person or I hate that person. So you get hate speech laws, you know, and that's kind of the only answer that you have, because the only other answer is more difficult than anybody's willing to take on, you know. And
well, the old cliche, my way or the highway, is becoming more prevalent
that's
in our lawmaking.
That's kind of what you devolve into, I think. When you don't have that moral balance, that's what you devolve into. So how do you know if something is violating the Establishment Clause? The Supreme Court took this on, and in a case called Lemon versus, which is funny. It's kind of funny that the guy's name was Lemon. Yeah, because it's like Lemon versus Kurtzman in 1971. They established what's called the Lemon test to determine if a government action complies with the Establishment Clause. So number one of the Lemon test is the law or policy must have been adopted with a secular or non-religious purpose. Tell me how that's possible.
Yeah.
Tell me how that's possible.
Well, in a room with two people, you know, that hate religion and Christians, yeah, it's possible.
You have a legislature that's filled with people who believe in Jesus Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are they supposed to create a law that doesn't have a religious purpose? How's that even possible? Because every purpose that they decide to do is going to be religious in nature. Mm-hmm. And then if you get a whole group of atheists in there, how are they supposed to create laws that don't have a religious purpose in the opposite direction? Every decision they make will be anti-religious.
Mm-hmm. Let's take an example, like a speed limit, 55 miles an hour.
Right?
That's not religious, is it?
No, you wouldn't think so.
Well, yeah, you don't want people to die.
Oh, because there's value to those lives?
There's value to those lives.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
That's a Christian religious value.
That's based on
okay,
what?
never mind. Eliminate the speed limit.
Can't have that Christian value.
You can't destroy books. You can't censor. Why
Oh,
not?
really?
No? Is that okay?
Well, it's becoming okay.
I mean, I don't think so, but
Are some books okay, some aren't?
Let me.
that's a
I
great
think it was
question.
Chris. You said, I think it was you, the public library should be no different than a high school or college
No, I think it's
library?
vastly different. The opposite of what you just said.
Okay. You're
think-
making the comparison.
I think there's a vast difference between a school library that's in I think everything in a school library, in like an elementary school, middle school, high school, should be guarded to be appropriate for the children that are
age
attending
group,
that school.
Right. But who makes that determination?
The school board does. Yeah, I mean, obviously.
The secular school board.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can't use your religion to make those decisions.
That's what this is all about, right? Does it pass the lemon test?
Yeah. Now, see, on the other side of that, like with public libraries, I don't think there should be any limitations to literature in public libraries.
Go rent a Playboy?
Yeah. Well, I don't view Playboy as literature. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can definitely draw specific lines as far as to what classical literature is or what literature is entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But, books of entertainment, like magazines and periodicals, that's a whole different issue.
But they're in the libraries.
They don't have to be.
No.
They don't have to be accessible at all.
But if you're saying that the public library should not have any restrictions unless it's pornographic, isn't that a little bit of censorship there?
It could be if it wasn't accessible, for sure. Like, it's not like you can't go down to your local convenience store and get a porn mag, but you definitely can't go down to your local store and get a Keats poetry book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a question of accessibility. Like, you can go down to the local news store or go down to the grocery store and get a newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go to the library to get the newspaper. In fact, you could get all that stuff online. You could get everything online for the most part.
So everything should be accessible, and it is. But in a public library, you're saying that it needs to be regulated.
I mean, maybe not. It depends on the community.
I agree.
I think that the community can make those decisions for themselves. But also, I don't believe that censorship should be a topic of conversation for a public library.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I should be able to go down to the public library and check out a Bible if I wanted to. Or I should go to the public library and be able to check out Mein Kampf if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Or go down and check out, the latest Black Lives Matter novel or literature book or whatever.
And can we? Right now?
I'm not sure that you can. I don't know that I could go down to my public library and get Mein Kampf because it's hate speech, or 1981. That's on the banned literature list. 1984. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
Or Fahrenheit 451. That's on the banned list.
Yeah.
You have a lot of these books that talk about like dystopian nightmares where, people, kind of just fall into line with the government.
Lord of the Flies.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lord of the Flies
to be
is on the banned list.
Required reading when I was in high school.
Right. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
My wife just and that's not accessible in public libraries. I know that it is because my wife just checked it out for our youngest son to read, Lord of the Flies. And so, it's there, right?
Yeah.
I just think it's careful. You need to be careful when you start. And to our question, it's impossible to make those decisions without your religious morality getting into that.
Agreed.
So how can you possibly say that, well, you can't make that decision about that book because of separation of church and state? Nope. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
No, you can make those decisions.
Not part of the equation.
Yep. And if you don't like the way that decision is being made, then, go and do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have a political process.
That's right.
So the second one is the principal or primary effect, and this is the second part of the lemon test. The principal or primary effect must be one that neither advances nor inhibits religion. So displaying a nativity scene on a courthouse lawn or the 10 Commandments on a wall inside the courthouse are neither a law nor a policy. They are a demonstration of the values of the people in the same way that flying the American flag over the courthouse is the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, as Jefferson put it. So the principal or primary effect can neither be one that inhibits or advances religion. That actually makes sense to me.
It does. But if you slap the 10 Commandments on a wall inside the courtroom, does that advance religion?
Well, obviously the court didn't think so.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I think that's a decision that courts have to make, and that's one of the things that Supreme Court justices are really burdened with is making opinions about these kinds of things that are really hard to make opinions about, because you have to really be careful. That's why it's really great to have a judiciary that are constitutionalists, that are pure constitutionalists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the ones that Trump appointed, what's great about them is that they were pure constitutionalists. That's why Roe v. Wade got overturned, because that is a power constitutionally that is reserved for the states. It's not explicitly given to the government to have that. You could do that with a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's just take like OSHA, for instance. OSHA is a federal program or a federal government bureaucracy to ensure workplace safety. At what point in the Constitution is the federal government given the authority to do that?
None.
It's not. That's reserved for the states. And so you should let the states be regulating that. But somebody at some point said, well, the states aren't doing it right, so we want to do it ourselves. Well, now you get this massive bureaucracy where, you know, you're telling people they have to work in a certain way. You know, and that's part of the problem with our federal government, all these stupid bureaucracies. And now the IRS is like bloated, way larger than it ever was. It's like 3 times larger than it was. It's disgusting. Don't get me started on that.
Another time.
Has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But
so, number 3.
Yeah. The statute or policy must not result in an excessive entanglement of government with religion. Demonstrations of the people's faith by the government doesn't represent excessive entanglement by any reasonable interpretation. The church is not dependent on such demonstrations. That's so vague.
Yeah.
Like
excessive entanglement.
You could argue that all day long, what excessive entanglement is.
That's the unfortunate part of the law. Of the test is at some point you have to apply opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definition.
Yeah. You can hang the 10 Commandments up there, but for goodness sakes, don't start following them.
It really boils down to, I think you have to make a determination. What am I willing to allow? You know, I mean, you can't say we can put the 10 Commandments up, but what happens if somebody wants to put the pillars of Islam up? You know, what do you do then? Do you say no? And that's Sharia law.
You get excessively entangled at that point.
Exactly. You know, so you have to be. To me, it seems like the best way to go about this would be to ask yourself, in every situation, what am I willing to allow? If you aren't willing to allow other religions to participate in that because of their belief structures, then you should probably bow out.
Yeah, it's kind of the inverse test.
Yeah, but what are you saying? When you say we, are you talking about us as individuals, or
I'm talking
us
about
as the government?
I'm talking about Christians in general.
Christians in general,
because Christians in general, I'll just give you an example: school prayer. Like you hear this all the time. Well, our schools started to decline when we took God out of schools. Yeah, bull crap. Our schools started to decline when we allowed teachers to start teaching evolution and secular humanism. That's when it started declining. It didn't have anything to do with God in school, because it could be debatable whether God was in school or not. The problem with forcing the idea that we want God in school and we want prayer in school, like with the whole coach, we're going to talk about this court case where the coach was on the 50-yard line and he prayed with his kids. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what would happen if that was a Satanist that got at the 50-yard line and did a short ritual to the power of Satan in order to empower his students with demonic power? What would Christians say then? Would we say, "Oh, well, it's the free exercise of religion"?
They're cheating.
They would be freaking out. Be like, "Oh, I can't believe this Satanist is doing this or this Satanist." Well, you know, Satanism is a religion, so.
And they're saying the same thing about us.
Exactly. You know, so it's not as easy as you think it is. Like when you say, well, we need prayer in school, and that's the only way we're going to get God. We're going to get God back in school. Well, okay, what are you willing to allow? And what way are you going to use the Constitution to tell that Muslim that he can't go to the school and pray? Because that's not the way that the Establishment Clause works. In fact, the Establishment Clause was set so that the government could not limit that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no legal mechanism to say, oh, the Muslim can't go in there. All you have is your Christian standard to vote to say, well, we can't allow Muslims or Buddhists or Satanists to pray. We only allow Christians, which is why there's such a big brouhaha at the county commissioner level with the whole Christians coming in to pray before the service, right? You had one county commissioner that was really against it. You know, Chris Filios is basically against anything that's Christian anyways. But I mean, he's kind of right, because who gets to determine that? You know, why does it have to be Christian, and who gets to make that choice? And I understand what Paul Vanoy is trying to do. You know, one of the things he requested in his letter to them is that they put him in charge of the chaplaincy rotation, and they get to vet the people that go in there and determine who gets to go in and pray for these county commissioner meetings. Well, Paul, are you going to allow a Satanist to come in and pray? I mean, it seems to me like the better option would be to let each county commissioner have their own free exercise of religion and pray if they choose to.
There you go.
And leave it alone.
And that the same goes back to the school, where the family that wants to see prayer in school, they need to train up their children
to pray in school.
Yeah,
exactly.
To bring their Bible to school. That's how God gets into schools, by individuals.
Exactly. And if you're concerned about the county commissioner meetings not being Christian, then perhaps you should sit down at lunch with one of your commissioners and talk to them about, your Christian faith and, try and impact them morally instead of forcing them to listen to some prayer that you decide is vetted for your purpose. Now, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Christians out there that are going to freak out when they hear that. And they're going to be like, well, Pastor Chris and all those guys are against Christians and they're against, Christians being in the prayer. And it's like, no, all I'm saying is, you can't have one without the other. That's not the way America works. And I know that's hard to hear.
Well,
but
it is the way it worked in the beginning, I believe, because there were so few people that objected to Christianity, to a moral and religious people, which is what we were.
Yeah.
And we're not anymore.
Well, it could be that Christians just need to take responsibility.
Yeah. Step it up.
Look,
make some noise.
We failed. The reason this country is morally declining is because we allowed people to live for generations without the gospel of Jesus Christ.
People believed in the separation of church and state.
Yep.
There's no such thing.
And we allowed it.
Yeah.
And we did not impact the country morally the way that we should. And
I think it's bigger and deeper than that even. If
do
you
tell.
Well, if we believe that if we believe the end of the book, and if we believe that all things are in decay, and that original sin is born into mankind and it's going to multiply and replicate, and we know how it all ends, then we cannot prevent it, essentially. And
but
we
remains.
started a country primarily made of Christians, but the rest of the world was not. It grew and developed and spread just as it would. Eventually, it's going to seep into America. We know that it's going to influence us more than we're going to influence them just by simple multiplication. It's a losing battle, ultimately. We know it's going to lose.
Yeah. Well, we read the end of the book.
It's kind of it's kind of like nihilistic theology.
It's not supposed to get better.
So this is just the natural progression of the sovereignty of God and His plan for mankind to bring it to an end.
You're right. I think that's true. But also, the book doesn't give us the option to ignore it.
Right.
No, we're to fight back to the very end.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the quandary of it, and it's kind of the quandary of the sovereignty of God in a lot of different areas. But it's like, what point do we interfere with the sovereignty of God And why do we think that we can do that? You know,
Exactly.
that's another interesting question. But yeah, I mean, it's a big question. So the average citizen isn't very concerned that leftist extremists fight to completely sanitize any notion of supreme being from the public space. Secular Jane and John Doe are more frightened by churches or pastors who dare to stand up or speak out in the government realm. They'd hate this church. You know, that's the reason that Candlelight gets a lot of hate too, because they're very politically motivated. And they do a lot of like political things. A lot of their congregation is very dedicated to, you know, X, Y, or Z different political agenda or conspiracy or, you know, whatever, which is fine.
They have the right and the legal protection to do so.
Yeah, they should be. They should have the right to do that without question. Whether you like it or not, it makes no difference. You know, they have the explicit right to do that. They're not changing any policy or law. You know, they're expressing an opinion. And people like to use the IRS as a baton to tell churches that they cannot talk about politics or whatever the case may be. And it's simply not the truth.
No.
We can't support a political candidate, and the law for the IRS says that we can't exceed a certain percentage of what we do as political before we get considered to be a political activist group.
Time and money in that realm, right?
But the thing about the IRS is that they have no percentage. It's just like subjective. The problem with taxing churches is that you can't tax a church without violating their free exercise of religion. You can't tax a person for their religion, which is why tax exemption exists for churches. You know, you can't tax people for their rights. And so it's a tricky situation. That's why pastors are dual statused, because the IRS doesn't know how to deal with them without violating their constitutional rights. It's bonkers, man. It's hard to deal with. That's where they conveniently ignore what follows the Establishment Clause, the free exercise clause of the amendment. In today's society, the free exercise of religion is more than ignored. It's actively suppressed, even to the point of legal persecution. So here is a bevy of Supreme Court cases where they upheld the free exercise of rights in nearly every case. So the first one, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. You're going to recognize a lot of these. This is the most recent one. The court held that the First Amendment's free speech and free exercise clause protect a high school coach's right to pray on the 50-yard line of the school football field after a game in a quiet, publicly visible religious observance. This is a great victory, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, until
Once
that
again,
Satanist gathers at the 50-yard line and Christians get freaked out by it. You know, it's like, well, this is a great victory for freedom of religion, for the First Amendment.
First Amendment.
Yeah,
there it is.
And I would rather that the Muslim be able to pray at the 50-yard line publicly without any kind of persecution at all. I think that's the proper place for government and law, you know. But on the other side of that, Christians can't be freaking out if that happens.
No.
That's the way the law is written, and we can't create a law that inhibits other religions.
That's right. And
even if that religion is atheism.
And as Matthew 28 says, we now have I don't want to say a target, but a prospect. I know that guy's a Muslim because he's praying to his Muslim God. Now I have an opportunity to go to him after the game and say, hey, can I talk to you about my God?
Gosh, that is such a better way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Instead of freaking out and wanting to change everything that's there, because that's what the secular humanists are doing.
Yeah.
They're wanting to change everything to go against us.
Yeah, they want to remove God from the equation completely. That's what they would like to do, because man is God.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is a religion.
Yes.
You know, if you believe that man is God, that's a religion. If you believe that there is no God, that's a religion.
Yep.
You accept by faith that there's no God. That's an atheist. Yeah. So I think that's funny. Anyways, the next one is Carson versus Macon. The court ruled that the free exercise clause prohibited Maine from discriminating against religious schools by excluding those schools from a tuition assistance program open to non-sectarian schools in rural areas without freestanding public schools. I think this is a great discussion, because that's one thing that sets aside Christian like colleges from public colleges, is that they don't accept federal money. Like if you go to a Christian college, you can't get a federal grant to go to a Christian college, because Christian colleges don't accept them. And they don't accept them. I'm not sure if you could accept them and go. Perhaps the government gives the ability to do that. But I think that in accepting grants, you also accept the requirements that go along with those grants.
Right. I was going to say that my understanding is that most Christian colleges will accept government grants, but there's stipulations that come along with that. Hillsdale College, on the other hand, in its 200-year history, has never accepted a penny. Whether it be grants, whether it be scholarships,
loans.
If it was government, U.S. federal government, they won't accept it.
Yeah.
And so that leaves them the only, my understanding, Christian college that the government can't touch, can't speak to, can't put any type of rule over.
Well, that would be true. I'm not sure that they're the only one. I don't know about Southern Baptist. I'm pretty sure that Golden Gate doesn't accept any kind of like federal monies. I could be wrong. I don't know, but
be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Hillsdale says that they're the only one.
Oh, that's one of their selling points.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure that it should be a thing. I mean, if you have federal government, if you have federal money available for education, then a person should be able to use that federal money for education, no matter what they're learning. If it's learning to exercise their freedom of religion, then it should be funded, you know, without question. I mean, it shouldn't be. What regulations are you putting on that? What stipulations are you putting on that? And are those stipulations adversely affecting that person's freedom of religion? I mean, so I think that's an interesting conversation, probably one that you could have for a very long time.
All the way down to the local level.
Yeah, all the way down to
before.
Yep. And one of the things they're talking about here in Idaho is like the state money following the kid. You know, I mean, how many children are going to end up going to private schools because the money is following them? If that kind of thing gets passed, public schools are going to be struggling because people are going to be flocking to private schools where they can get better education. And I don't say that to knock our public schools, because we have great people in our public schools, especially here in Lakeland Joint District. Yes. We have amazing people in the school district.
Doing a great job.
But the simple fact of the matter is that if you have a chance, if you have a choice of sending your child to a public school or sending them to like a STEM school, it's not really a competition. You know,
well, they can up their game.
They can,
which is a good thing too. You know, it's all about
competition.
The kids win. The kids win.
Competition, breeds excellence.
Yeah, there are 18 colleges, Christian colleges, that don't accept federal funds. Now, I don't know where that goes, whether they the school don't accept it, or whether they don't even allow the students to accept grants.
Is there a list?
Yeah. Want me to read it?
Yeah.
Alethea Christian College in Idaho.
Oh,
never heard of them. Bethlehem College and Seminary, Minnesota. Boyce College, Kentucky. Christendom College, Virginia. Faith Bible College, Maine. Grove City College, Pennsylvania. Gutenberg College in Oregon.
Gutenberg College, huh?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's related to the Gutenberg Bible.
Yeah. Huh. Certainly based on the name. Hillsdale College, Michigan. Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary in Tennessee, New College Franklin, Tennessee, New St. Andrews College, Idaho, that's down in Moscow, Patrick Henry College, Virginia, Pensacola Christian College, Florida, Principal College, Illinois, Settler College, Massachusetts, and here it is, Chris, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, but in Kentucky and Southwest Western Baptist Theological Seminary in Texas,
Yep.
and the Wyoming Catholic College in Wyoming.
Okay, yeah, I thought there was one or two. Yeah.
Wow, there's only
That's a short list, though.
Yeah, it is a short list. Government aid, this is a paragraph at the end. Government aid comes with government strings, whether it goes directly to a school or directly to its students. To avoid these strings, a school must decline aid both to itself and to its students. That is, it must decline to participate in government-sponsored student loan and grant programs. Most of the schools on the list refuse not only federal, but also state and local government aid.
Interesting.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so.
All right, so let's move on. Shortliff and City of Boston. The court unanimously held that the City of Boston did not engage in government speech when it let groups raise a flag of their choosing on the city flagpole outside of City Hall during community events because the city was not itself. So I guess they had groups that were coming in and they were raising the flag, a Christian flag, based on their beliefs onto the pole that belonged to the city. And they're saying that it did not violate the Establishment Clause if they did that. Is that what I'm reading?
Could not discriminate against a Christian flag based on the flag's religious viewpoint.
The flags can have it's an inanimate object, guys. It does have a viewpoint. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
That's an interesting one. That one might be fun to.
Can you imagine going to a city hall and then taking their flag down and raising your own flag?
Yeah.
Which is all well and good, but you have to understand if somebody goes in there and raises a Nazi flag,
nothing you can do about it.
What are you going to do? Right? Freedom of speech, isn't that covered? So the next one, American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. The court held that the display and maintenance of a large memorial cross by a local government does not violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. So it didn't create a specific law or policy that people had to follow. It was just an illustration of the beliefs of the community.
If you've done any traveling around the United States of America, there are gigantic crosses in various and sundry places.
They're
everywhere.
Yep. We have 3.
Yeah.
And actually, if you play Pokemon Go, there's like a Pokemon thing under the crosses.
Under the crosses, yes.
It used to be when Pokemon Go was a big thing, like we'd be sitting here, and you look out the window, there'd be some dude in his pajamas out there with his phone.
We'd be looking
catching
at the
whatever thing it is out there virtually.
What are they doing out there?
What are they doing?
It wasn't until Kim showed up. Playing Pokemon Go, and we're like, what are you doing out there?
Let's see. Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. You guys will remember this. This guy.
It's still going on.
Yeah, he's been to the Supreme Court multiple times at great expense, fighting this really, really animated Colorado Civil Rights Commission. They're so hostile toward him. The court has ruled that permitting a baker to refuse to make a cake for a gay wedding, the court's ruling had the effect of permitting a baker to refuse to make a cake for a gay wedding, but only because of the hostility of the Civil Rights Commission, which seemed hostile towards religion. So this whole thing is a big fiasco.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah, I mean,
every time a case gets settled, they throw 2 more at him, and
they send somebody else in there to bake a cake. You know,
the interesting part is he's busy making cakes for those that are on his side.
Yep.
And the ACLJ, American Center for Law and Justice, they have been supporting him through this whole ordeal.
Wow,
from the beginning, along with others.
Yeah. So if you are into supporting ministries that are doing good things, consider supporting the ACLJ.
Yeah.
Yep. The ACLJ is great. The Christian Law Association is really great. We use the both of those quite a lot.
And
there was another one.
There was another one. Yeah,
there was another one. I can't remember
coming
the
to
name
me right now.
Yeah. The next one, Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia Incorporated versus Comer. The court ruled that excluding religious organizations from otherwise neutral and secular and aid programs violates the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. So, yeah, they should have access to those aid programs as well. Holt versus Hobbs. The court held that an Arkansas prison policy that prevents a Muslim prisoner from growing a half-inch beard in accordance with his religious beliefs violates the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. I mean, I would agree with this, except for the fact that when you are put in prison, you lose your rights.
You lose your rights, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems, you did the crime to put yourself in a position where you are under the subjection of those people that are in charge of you. I mean, that's
it's interesting is the act, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. What the heck do those two things have to do with each other?
They got passed at the same time. In order to get one passed, you had the other one included.
Well, I think it's one act, but they didn't want to use the word prison. So it's land for institutionalized persons.
Yeah, maybe.
They gotta
soften that
make
language
it sound really ominous.
Yeah. Institutionalized Persons Act. I really honestly don't see what the problem with him growing a half-inch beard would be, but I think that kind of thing needs to be left up to the warden, doesn't it?
I would think so. I mean, we've all seen movies about, wardens that seemingly go over the top with their disciplinary actions and everything. But also most of those institutions are doing quite well. Yeah. There's, one down, I think it was in Arizona. They're not taking any federal money. They are self-sustaining. Actually, it's in
That's
the
the
Midwest.
One with the kind of rogue sheriff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
The inmates have to wear pink coveralls, I think, and
work like 12-hour days and have to sleep on the ground, and he makes it punishment.
Makes it tough. Hey, it's just like prison, huh?
Good for him.
Yeah.
Town of Greece versus Galloway. The court held that a town's practice of opening its town board meetings with a prayer offered by members of the clergy does not violate the Establishment Clause when the practice is consistent with the tradition long followed by Congress and state legislatures. The town does not discriminate against minority faiths in discriminating who may offer a prayer, and the prayer does not coerce participants with non-adherence. And this is kind of the thing with the whole praying before a meeting. It's like, that's great, but when the other faith comes in and they want to pray, you can't prevent them, because then that would be a violation of the Establishment Clause.
Right.
So, Van Orden versus Perry. The court held that the Establishment Clause did not bar the monument on the grounds of the Texas state capitol. The plurality deemed the Texas monument part of the nation's tradition of recognizing the Ten Commandments' historical meaning. Though the commandments are religious, the plurality argued, quote, simply having religious content or promoting a message consistent with a religious doctrine does not run afoul of the Establishment Clause.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah, that was the one where people, churches just started buying Ten Commandment monuments and putting it on their property.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is funny, because Hebrews tells us that the old covenant is obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
We don't live by the Ten Commandments anymore. We live by the new covenant that Christ established as the high priest. I would recommend going to Athol Baptist Church.
Where did you hear that?
And following their sermon series on Hebrews.
Learn more here.
Yeah. Or AtholBaptistChurch.org.
Yeah, maybe even a springboard for you studying the book of Hebrews.
It's a great book, man. Blow your mind.
It is.
It is. Yeah, and it has. The next one, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, which is Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, versus Village of Stratton. The court held that the ordinance's provisions making it a misdemeanor to engage in door-to-door advocacy without first registering with the mayor and receiving a permit violate the First Amendment, as it applies to religious proselytizing, anonymous political speech, and the distribution of handbills. The court reasoned that the village's interest in preventing fraud could not support the ordinance's application to the religious organizations. This is a great example of trying to prevent a crime, but interfering with personal freedom in the same instance. It's like safety over freedom is what that boils down to. It's kind of the same argument that a lot of the Second Amendment fights are over. It's like safety over freedom.
Yeah, who was it that said that anyone who gives up a little freedom for safety deserves neither?
Yeah. I don't know. I want to say it's Jefferson,
Franklin?
but I don't know. Let's look it up. Look it up. Hold
You
on.
going for
I'll
it?
look it up.
All right.
Do 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 do. Man, he's typing fast. It's getting very wordy.
Ben Franklin.
Ta-da!
Yep.
Okay.
Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
Mm-hmm. I think I had that on my bulletin board for a while. You'd think I'd remember.
Yeah. What's wrong with you? You must be getting old.
Old. I've heard that word.
He suffers from OLD.
OLD. Yeah.
So there's another one, Zellman versus Simon Harris. The court held that an Ohio program does not violate the Establishment Clause because it's part of Ohio's general undertaking to provide educational opportunities to children, and that government aid reaches religious institutions only by way of the deliberate choice of numerous individual recipients. It's kind of the thing with the government grant thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't violate the Establishment Clause if people choose to use it. Yeah. Good News Club versus Milford Central School. And you'd never think to see like something like the Good News Club in a court case.
No.
It's a good news club. Come on, guys.
It's the good news that is the problem.
Yeah, that's
here.
the problem. The court held that Milford's restriction violates the club's free speech rights and that no Establishment Clause concern justifies that violation. So when Milford denied the Good News Club access to the school's limited public forum on the grounds that the club was religious in nature, it discriminated against the club because of its religious viewpoint in violation of the Free Speech Clause of the First Amendment. So, yeah, if you are a public entity paid for by tax dollars, you could not prevent the public from using it based on their religious values. Mm-hmm. You could deny it for other reasons, but you can't deny it because of religious values.
Right.
Yeah, that's not a thing. So even though religious people have been vindicated in all these cases, it's been very expensive for them to do so. Mm-hmm. That's why I was saying, if you want, it would be a good thing to support the ACLJ,
right?
And the Christian Law
any
Association. of those
organizations,
any of those legal firms that run off of your gifts. Mm-hmm. There's a few of them that they could really use your help because they're fighting a lot of battles. I wish I could think of that other one.
No, I'm going nuts here.
Christian Law Association,
CLA,
ACLJ.
I'm going to go find out.
All right. Well, I'll keep going until you find out. There goes Greg. Don't fall, Greg.
Get up first.
See you later, Greg.
Bye.
There he goes. He's gone. He gone. So it's very expensive. So that's often the point many times, that even if the courts won't penalize what the left would consider religious extremists or domestic terrorists, simply defending themselves against losing causes could at least intimidate their opponents and their sympathizers and financially destroy them at best. So, yeah, that is a strategy. Yeah. Whether it's going to be successful or not, let's make them pay the money, and let's bankrupt them, which is so disgusting.
It is
just so gross.
You ready for it?
Yep.
ADF,
Alliance Defying Freedom.
Defending freedom, right?
I like denying freedom.
That's the other one.
That's the other one.
That's what they're fighting.
Yeah. Alliance Defending Freedom. Yep. Let's see. So the next time somebody protests separation of church and state when you mix politics with religion in the same discussion, I'd suggest that you ask them to go and read up on the clause and see what it says.
Nicely.
Yeah, just do it nicely, kindly, in a friendly tone, with
love.
with the desire of discipling them to be a better person.
Hey, brother, can I tell you how wrong you are
Yeah.
about your thoughts and beliefs?
Yeah. How you're failing philosophically. Can I tell you that? I think, though, that if we did that, if we were a little bit more vocal about the education part of it, generationally, we could make things better. But that's the thing, right? It's like that's not what nobody wants to do. Nobody
Right.
wants to do the hard work to make it better. They just want to create laws to force people to be the way they want them to be.
Mhm.
When in reality, the solution to the moral problem of America is not more laws. That's never the solution.
No.
The solution is to engage the world and give them Christ. That's the solution. When we learn that generationally, it will change.
Right.
But that's not a change that's going to happen overnight. That's
No.
people don't like that.
Well,
in the world of instant gratification, that's not good enough.
But as individuals, proclaiming Christ, that can happen overnight. That can happen
certainly
right
can.
now,
Certainly
listening
can.
to this, saying, from this day forward, I'm going to preach Christ
Yep.
to everybody I meet.
And exponentially, it will increase over time.
Yeah.
And then generationally, within 2 generations,
Yeah.
you could see a complete
It's-
paradigm shift in the way that the country sees its
Yeah.
morality.
It's been two generations to get to where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can happen
it can
fairly quickly, but it's not going to happen overnight.
No.
It's not going to be a simple go to the legislature, create a document that says that you can't be this type of immoral.
It means each one of us as individuals has to go out and do the Great Commission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go
Yep.
reach and build.
Acts 5:27 through 29 says this, and when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest questioned them, saying, we strictly charged you to not teach in his name, yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring the man's blood upon us. But Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than man.
Amen.
When people tell you that Christians can't be dissenters of belief because we need to be obedient to the law, I would recommend that you read the book of Acts,
Mhm.
because everything that they did basically in the book of Acts was in direct violation of the law.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the book of Acts is a book of rebellion.
Mhm.
Yep.
It's a book of
Yeah.
abject kind of disagreement with the laws of the land. How many times did Paul run from the cops?
Yeah.
You know, basically, he was lowered in a basket over a wall
Mm-hmm.
to get away
escape.
from the cops one
Yep.
time.
Stoned.
I say
Left for
cops.
dead?
I say cops, but like law enforcement. Yeah, it's like I'm just trying to make it relevant to our
man.
day. It's like I'm gonna call the cops. Well, give me a basket. I'm gonna get out of here. Yeah. Also, that's an interesting justification for hiding from law enforcement when they're preventing you from doing the work, you know, and doing whatever's required to be able to spread the word of God. I mean, there's some interesting points to be made in all of that.
Fox's Book of Martyrs,
Mhm.
you know, is all about that. You know,
You just have to be willing to pay the cost.
that's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be willing to pay the cost. Dissidence often brings with it a cost that people are unwilling to pay.
Mhm.
So you just have to understand that.
Yeah.
Well, you got any last words, Ken?
Nope.
This was a good one.
Today.
I really enjoyed this one.
I did too. It was. It's a really good civics lesson.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, great one for homeschoolers out there. Here's a nice
Mhm.
object lesson for you.
Yeah.
Teach your children to understand what the law of our land is and what our obligation to our faith is.
Yeah, that's great. Greg, any last words?
You know, we mentioned the Federalist Papers earlier, and I would encourage anybody that really wants to know and understand our Constitution to go through those. It's not an easy read. It's not, exciting. It's not a page turner. But each one of those will explain to you a little bit more about why the Constitution was made the way it was,
Yeah.
and how to really interpret the Constitution.
And
the way it was
you're
written.
going to read the first 5 pages and you're going to be lost. But the more that you read it, like if you can get
Right.
through 5 to 10, 20 pages, your brain will start understanding it.
Right.
You'll start gathering how to understand it. You just have to give it time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is complex, man. Their writing was on point,
Mhm.
beautiful even in some
Yeah,
regards.
almost
yeah.
like poetry.
Gavin, did you have any last words?
So many.
That yeah,
So many.
so many.
He says so many.
So many last words.
So many.
So many.
And smiling
Yeah.
while he's saying that.
Yeah. Well, that about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. If you like this episode or you have an idea for an episode that you'd like to hear us investigate or a guest that you'd like to hear us interview, send us an email at 3p@ethelbaptistchurch.org. If you just enjoyed this episode, give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I'd encourage you guys, share it, because that's how we grow. Thanks to Gavin and Greg and Ken and me for helping to produce this episode.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm thanking myself.
Yeah.
Yep. And also Ethel Baptist Church for its generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. Until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples that can do the same. And with that, we are out.